Before we get into the issues in policing that I want to talk about, and in fact, before you guys listen to the podcast, I want to talk a little bit about liberalism. And I think this is important because, for one thing, it comes up in the podcasts. And both of them, Luke Hunt and Del Pozo, the two guys that Lamb interviews, both mention liberalism and what liberalism requires. And I don't think the podcast does a great job of explaining what they mean by this. They say a bit about it, they kind of explain it in passing, but they don't really dig into it. And I think digging into it is important for understanding the issues with policing they raise, and it'll also be important throughout the rest of the semester and to know what we mean by liberalism. And one other reason that I think it's important to talk about this is to avoid misunderstanding. The term liberalism, as Del Pozo uses it, as Lamb and Hunt use it, doesn't mean what, liberalism means in ordinary American political discourse. The way that people on the evening news or a blog or a newspaper editorial or whatever use it, they'll usually, when they talk about liberal, they'll mean the political left in the U.S., right? The Democratic Party as opposed to conservatives, as opposed to the Republican Party. That's not what liberal in this sense means. Liberal in this sense is a broad way of thinking about government and political questions. And I think it's a way that people on both the right and left share, or at least a lot of people on the right and left, right? There are a lot of people on the political right in America who are liberals in this sense, as weird as that might sound to you. There are also a lot of people on the political left in the U.S. who are liberals in this sense. And you guys might be saying, well, why do philosophers and, political theorists, they'll use the term in this way a lot. Y'all might be saying, well, look, why have you got to make up a new meaning for this term? Why do you have to be confusing in that way? And I'll say this about it. It's actually the way that Americans use the term liberal that's weird. It doesn't mean this in Britain. It doesn't mean this in the rest of Europe. This using liberal to stand for the political left, it's only something that Americans do. It's really odd with us. And the sense of the term liberal that Lamb and Del Pozo and Hunt and other philosophers and political theorists, it's actually a much older meaning of the term. So really, it's we Americans, we contemporary Americans, who are using the term in a weird way. It didn't traditionally mean this, and it doesn't mean this for just about everybody else in the world. So we're the weird ones, we Americans. Anyway, what liberal in this older sense means, it's a broad way, as I said, of thinking about the government and political questions. And I think you'll notice, once we see what it is, that the founding fathers really thought of government in this way. And I think most Americans actually tend to, just whatever their political leanings. I gave you guys the Declaration of Independence because the Declaration of Independence is very much a clear and historically important statement of liberal thought. Okay, so let's start talking about what liberalism is. People might number this list a little differently. Some people might break this up in a different way. But I think these are the basic or defining features of liberalism. Government or state neutrality. Government or state neutrality, you guys will often hear that there should be a separation between church and state, right? Jefferson thought this. You see it in the Bill of Rights, with this, Congress shall make no laws establishing religion. And that's a good part of what government or state neutrality means. The state should be neutral as far as religion goes. This is a huge break, right? Britain had a state religion. It still does, right? The Anglican Church. We don't. That's part of what state neutrality means. Government neutrality. The government, the federal government, often people use, state as a term for the government. Well, it is supposed to be neutral as far as religion goes. We'll talk a bit more about this in a minute. Government neutrality actually means a little bit more than just no state religion or no government meddling in religion, but that's a big part of it. Legal equality of citizens. You see this in the Declaration, right? Jefferson says, all men are created equal. Now look, we can go into various ways that Jefferson himself did not live up to this ideal. It's hard not to say that Jefferson was a hypocrite, but I mean, the ideal is there. Everyone, every citizen of the state is equal in some sense, and they should be treated equally. Now that's going to be a huge issue, what equal treatment looks like. We'll talk more about that, but the thought is everybody ought to have the same rights. They ought to be treated in the same way by the legal system and the representatives of that legal system. Third, a focus on rights, right? In the American system, we have a Bill of Rights. It was one of the first things they passed. But any liberal government will focus on the rights of the citizens. There are certain things the government is not allowed to do. And in fact, people who take this liberal approach to government will say not just that the government shouldn't violate certain rights, but one of the main reasons we have a government is to protect our rights. Finally, rule of law. And what this means is that everyone is bound by the legal system. Even people in power, the president, senators, the governor of the state, policemen, as we will talk about in the next few lectures, are supposed to follow some kind of rules, right? Contrast that with, say, a dictatorship. In North Korea, Kim can do whatever he wants. He's the dictator. There's, if he wants it to happen, it happens. If he doesn't like you and wants you thrown in prison or killed, he just needs to say that and it will happen. In the US, no matter how much the governor or the president or the mayor or whoever hates your guts, he can't just say, kill this person and expect someone to go kill you, right? There is a legal system that limits even their power. They have to, in some sense, follow the rules. Now, that's just a first pass at all these. In this lecture and the next, I'm going to say a lot more about each of these features of liberalism. I just wanted to take a first pass in this slide. All right, so in the next lecture, we'll dig more deeply into what these features mean, though.